So far we have covered all the topics related to URL filtering. So basically we started with URL filtering basics, then we covered URL custom list, then we covered the topic on URL custom category, then in the last topic we covered the URL filtering and profiling which was like quite a big topic. Now the last topic remained, which is the URL filtering using EDL. As you remember, we already have one of the topic upon the EDL, but that was like on the theory. So we discussed upon the EDL upon the theory, and we had some idea how you can use EDL and map upon the firewall, right? But in this topic we are going to do as a practical. We're going to create some EDL list. So for example, what we're going to do, basically we're going to create some EDL list onto the IIS server what we have created already, and we're going to create multiple EDL list, for example related to allow list, then block list, right? And those EDL we're going to download on the firewall, right? So what will happen, we are going to make changes into the EDL, whatever the URL or IP list, and that list is going to download on the firewall. So we are going to achieve this task by using EDL and by using the IIS server. So let's get started. As you can see, I have created one of the IIS server and I have loaded one of the basic web page for WHIT. Now what we're going to do, basically we're going to use this IIS server and we can take an advantage for the EDL as well. So let me show you how we're going to take that advantage. For example, this particular website or this web page is located under the root path of the IIS. So let me go into the root path. Basically, once you install the IIS server on your server or maybe one of your Windows machine, it is going to create a folder called inetpub, and into the inetpub there would be the folder called www-root. So in there you can put your home pages for the website. For example, index.html, this is one of our home page for WHIT, and this is the information it actually is pulling from this HTML page. Now what we're going to do, basically, since this is like root folder, we're going to create one more folder for EDL. So I'm going to create one folder called EDL, and under EDL what we're going to do, we're going to create all the list for the EDL. For example, let's start with the text file for the block IP list, okay, .txt. We'll just make sure when you are giving the name to the list, you are not putting any spaces. For example, block space IP space list, right? So that is something firewall sometimes get confused with the path, so you can use either underscore or hyphen, right? So I'm going to use hyphen. Now block IP list .txt, this is my first file. Now let me create one more file which is related to block URL list. So this would be my second file. Now I want to also have some file where I can allow the websites in the future. So allow hyphen IP list, so it would be my allow IP list, and the last file would be for allowing the URL in case in the future if I have any kind of requirement, right? URL list, right? So we have basically 4 files, one for the allow IP list, allow URL list, block IP list, and block URL list. So let me go to the Excel. I have one of the template for this. For example, in here, as you can see, I have block IP list where I have some fake IP addresses, right? So these are the IP addresses we're going to add into the list, and then we are going to download this list on the firewall. So in the block IP list, let me just copy, let's go into the text file, block IP list, and we can just paste. That's it. So this is one of the list we have created. Now let's go back to Excel and copy URL list, okay, where block URL list, and I can just paste in here. Done. Now let's go to allow IP list, and in allow IP list let me copy the IP addresses, and done. Save. Allow URL list. So these are all like examples of IP and URL, but this is the way you can create this list, and you can keep adding all the IPs or URL you want to block. Now we'll discuss about how we can block this IP or URL, or we can target this list into the in the policies, right? Now let's go to firewall and configure the EDL. But just to make sure whether this list is working or not, what you can do is just you can copy the name, allow IP list, and as you can see, this is our one of the home page. So you can just add the folder name EDL and just copy the list, and it should download on your web page when you are doing this. And if it is not working, that means there is some issue. So let's put this. As you can see, I can see all the list we have created. Now let me do the testing for maybe URL, okay, I can see the URL. If you can do the same thing with the block, okay, block is also coming. And then let's do the last for the IP. So that means our IIS server is responding for this URL path list, right? Now we are going to target this part on the firewall. Now let's go to firewall and configure this EDL list. So as you can see, we already have one of the EDL tests. Let's do this. Let's delete this one so that we have like a fresh list. We are seeing some error and it says like failed to delete external dynamic list, and it's because of the URL filtering. Okay, profile desktop users and allow. So it's basically this list is already been configured into the profile, that's why it's not able to delete. So in order to delete, let's go to URL filtering, and this is the profile we created, and in there it says like this one of the EDL list is actually doing the allow. So what we can do, we can just do the none, so that the action is going to be none for this particular profile, and then we should be able to delete this EDL from here. Let's go and delete once again. Okay, we have deleted the list. Now let's create our own list, but before we create, like let us have like a little bit of like the predefined list what you may already have, because once you have the threat protection installed, the license, then you are going to get predefined list. So let me show you what I mean. So this is the predefined list coming from Palo Alto, which is related to bulletproof IP, high risk IP, and non-malicious IP, right? So these are the lists you are also going to get on your firewall, and you can also target those predefined lists into the EDL, for example, into the policy when we want to block the IP addresses, right? Now let's create our own EDL, right? So to create EDL, just click upon add. So let's give it a name which is like block, like malicious IP. I want to block this kind of malicious IP, and into the type I need to mention whether my list type is IP or my list type is something URL. So I'm going to target with the IP because we have the path for the IP, right? Now let's go to in here. I see this particular path. I just need to copy this and paste in here. Okay, you have to make sure the URL is accurate, http colon / and the IP address. So one tip is like in here, when you are creating the EDL list, make sure you are using the IP address, because in some cases what we have seen, if we are giving the FQDN, which is like host name, sometime that is not able to resolve, then it actually doesn't work. So that is the reason, like sometimes giving the IP address is good, so that firewall is able to communicate with the EDL. Now the next is check for the update. Let me select the timing in order to fetch this update from the IIS. So I'm going to select the every 5 minutes, because I want this list to be updated every 5 minutes, because sometimes you make the changes and you want user to be able to work upon that particular change, or if you are blocking any IP address, you should be able to effect that change as soon as possible, right? So the minimum time on the firewall, which is every 5 minutes, so that is I'm going to select. Now the next is list entries and exceptions. We are not going to use any exception list, but we are going to see all the entries which is going to come from the EDL once it is downloaded on the firewall. So let's do the OK, and one of the EDL has been created for the IP. Now let's do this for the URL as well. I'm going to copy this. Let's create add and the block malicious URL. Let's copy, let's select the type, which is URL list. Now in the source we are going to add URL this time, so let's go in here, just convert into the URL. Okay, it's able to fetch. Let's copy this path and paste in here. let me delete extra one. HTTP, okay, this is my path, and check for update every 5 minutes, right? Now let's do the okay. Now let's create one more allow IP list and allow URL list. So let's go back and create add. Now let me give allow IP list. Let me go in here. All we need to do is like just change the name, right? IP allow. Okay, let's go into the firewall in the IP list. Okay, every 5 minutes say okay. Now let's do the last one for the allow URL list. Allow URL list, and type is going to be URL list. Source, we are going to make it to the URL this time, right? So let's go in here and URL. Okay, let's copy and paste in here. So everything is good. Fetching updates is every 5 minutes. So we have created all 4 required EDL list. Now once it is done, let's do and commit the change. So I'm going to put commit, and let's wait for while it's committing. Since commit is done, now let's go and do the testing upon EDL, whether it is working or not. So just click upon the EDL we have created just now, and in there's an option which is test source URL. This is the first option you can select for testing, or you can go directly into the list entries and exceptions. If the EDL is working, then you should be able to see all the list from this particular path we have provided, right? Since we do not see in here, which means the firewall has not updated the list here. That could be one reason. Other could be like firewall may not be able to communicate with IaaS server. So to do so, or maybe to do the testing, you can just select upon test source URL, and let's see if it is working or not. So let's wait. Okay, now we see like a URL access error, which means this firewall is not able to access this particular URL what we have created. Now let me see why. So while creating the EDL list, I realized the firewall IP I'm using is 192.168.254.130. So my third octet is 254, right? And the EDL we created on the IaaS server, it belonged to 0.110, which means third octet is 0. So they have to be in the reachability octet. For example, they have to be in the same network, or if they are in the different network, they should be able to communicate with each other. Since this is lab, so we have multiple interfaces, and that could be one of the reasons the firewall trying to reach to the IaaS server onto the same the octet, the third octet. So let's do one thing. I guess all we can do is first let's access this EDL using the third octet, because I have the IP of this IaaS server, which is 254.1, and it is working because on IaaS we can define any of these options. So let me show you from the IaaS server what I mean. If I go into the IaaS server, this is my one of the test server, and if I go into the bindings, and this is like a host name IP kind of thing. But if I just click upon the add, it is going to give me the option. These are all my interfaces, right? So it's showing which is the 192.168.254.1 is belong to my machine or the server. So I'm going to use that IP address because I want this, the firewall should be able to reach on this IP address, not to the earlier one, right? So we can just go into the firewall and make this very small change. This is just copy and paste, right? Just make sure there's nothing extra, something like this. So this is done. Now let's go into the other option, for example malicious URL. Let me just type in here, which is 4.1. that's it. Let me go in IP list, make the same changes. So sometimes it just you have to troubleshoot if things are not working. So this was one of the troubleshooting part. Let's go once again, the last one, 254.1, and we should be okay. Now let's do the commit and see after making the commit if the firewall is able to reach to the EDL list created on the IIS, right? Okay, so the commit is done. We have made our correction. Now let's go to allow your list again and let's do the testing for test source URL. And at this time you can see this source URL is accessible, right? So which means this firewall is able to fetch this path from the IIS server. Now to verify all the entries whether it is downloaded or not, you can go in here and you should be able to see the list, but since we just apply the change, it will take about 5 minutes because the duration of the fetching, it was 5 minutes, right? So let's wait while it is updating its database. Now we have waited more than 5 minutes. Now let's go into the list again and let's see if it is updated or not. So let's do the testing once again, and source URL is accessible. Let's go into the list entries and we are not able to see the entries, and let's see why it is not coming. Let's go into the monitoring section, and under monitoring there is an option called system, and here we can see all the information related to EDL and some other firewall related logs. Now in here we see the system log for the EDL, and it says like EDL allow URL list, what we were seeing just now, entry not referenced by a rule, which means the EDL what we created, it basically not referred by any of the rule in the policies. So let's go into the policy. So if you recall, we created these two policies and we only configured for the URL filtering, right? So if I click upon this policy and if I go into the destination, I do not see any EDL in here, and if I go into the URL, there is no EDL. So let's go to another policy, and if I go into the destination, there is no EDL in here and nothing is in URL category, which means the EDL what we created, it is not calling by any of this policy, and that is one of the reason that we are not getting the update fetch under the firewall, because it says like it is not referred by any of the policies. So let's do one thing, let's create some policies and we can configure the EDL under those policies. So let's click upon add and create one of the policy. Let's say block malicious IP for calling the IP related EDL. So the source zone is going to be local area network and source address is any. Into the destination, I'm going to select internet. Now in the destination address, I want to call EDL because I have created these two EDL. You can see external dynamic list, right? One is for allow IP list and another is for block. So I'm going to use block malicious IP list, and then application any, services any, let's give it in any, and my action is going to be block, right? It's like deny. So I have created one of this rule. So let me take this rule at the top because I want this first rule to be matched, because if any user is going to hit to malicious IP address, they should be get denied, right? Now after that we can create the similar for URL. So let me do one thing, let me just clone this rule and we can make some little bit of tweaking, right? So let's make it a URL list. All right, and then source is LAN, address is any, destination is internet. Now here I'm going to remove from destination address because I want to target under the URL category, and in here we have a few external dynamic list. I'm going to use for block malicious URL, right? And my action is deny. So I have created two policies for blocking the IP and blocking the URL, right? Similarly, let's create one policy for allowing allow EDL IP. So let's give it like clear network, address any, destination internet, and address I'm going to call upon allow IP list, and at this time my action is going to be allow, right? Okay, so let's do the clone and we are going to call upon the URL list as well. So let's give it a name which is URL list, source is LAN, destination let's give it any, and in the URL category our allow URL list is going to be for this EDL, and action is allow, right? So basically we have created 4 policies. The one is for a block malicious IP address. It's going to use for destination this block malicious IP, and action is deny. Same for the URL list, action is deny. Third one is allow EDL IP, action is allow, and it's going to use for this EDL for IP list, right? And the fourth one is like URL list and going to be allow. So we have created 4 policies and it is looking for the EDL list. So let's do the commit and let's see how it goes. Well, the commit is done. Now let's go to objects again and let's see how it goes this time. Let's click upon the allow URL list and test URL. It is accessible. Since we just made the change, it is updated already. I thought it's gonna take about 5 minutes or so, but as you can see, all the entries we put into the EDL, it is now updated. Now let's do one thing. Let's go into the other EDL categories, like for the URL, right? And as we can see, it's updated in here. Let's go into the allow IP list. Yeah, it's updated in here. Let's check upon the malicious IP as well, and it is all updated. So that is how you can use the EDL in order to point under the URL category. So what we did, basically we created one of the IS server and we created one of the folder called EDL. Under that EDL we created some of the lists we want to use under the EDL, and then after that under the EDL dynamic list we created all the required EDL we wanted to create. And then we also made some testing whether the URL were accessible or not. We are facing some issue, but we resolve it, like could be routing issue or something like that. But if it is like accessible in your enterprise scenario, it should be working fine. And then we provided the fetching time, which is like 5 minutes is like minimum. And then after that we created the policies, and under the policy we call upon which are the EDL we created, because if you are not calling that EDL under any of the policy, that EDL basically is not going to update under this EDL dynamic list. So like I waited about 5 to 10 minutes or maybe more, but I could not see this entry in here, and that was one of the issue, because we saw under the monitoring that it was giving the error that it was not referred by any of the rule, and that was the error. So as you can see, now we are seeing the different log in here. It says like EDL allow URL list, EDL fetch, job is done. So this is something what we expecting when the EDL is working fine between the IS server and the firewall, right? So that is how we can create EDL for IP or URL, and we can configure under the policies. Alright, so this is for now, and I will see you in the next section.